the marketplace of ideas, this is a very 18th and 19th century concept. It's very, very Anglo. It's an idea that really, the Greeks maybe had this idea. But it's a very attractive idea because it reminds us in some ways, and people are going to laugh at this, but it reminds them in some ways of Bitcoin, because what they're doing when they say, well, whose ideas are going to dominate? The traditional thought had been, well, whoever is the strongest. It just naturally flows from power on the ground. There's this, old principle of the Westphalian system of government, cuius regio, eius religio, which means whoever is the baron of that little German state, if he's a Catholic, you're Catholic. If he's a Buddhist, you're Buddhist. That's how it works, right? And so it was traditionally thought that the way, of course, you might have a university where people, think as they will, but certainly common people don't think for themselves. They get ideas from others. And so they should be getting ideas from an institution which tells them what to think. And this was not only the belief of the Catholics. This was the belief of the Anglicans. This was the belief of the Presbyterians. This was even the belief of the Puritans. So what made the Puritans, or as they were called, 400 years ago, the Independents or Brownists, separate, and what made them radical in the English Civil War was their belief that every church should govern itself by an election of, the elect, I guess. That was, not sure the details of, secret ballot there, not really how it works. But, even they basically did not think, the sort of the atomic principle, where every man is his own prophet was too radical even for the Fifth Monarchy men, right? So this is a very, very, radical way of thinking, that basically instead of a church which tells people what to think, we're going to have a market of ideas. And this market of ideas is going to function in essentially a Darwinian sense. It's going to function literally as a market, just the way the market evolves the best, possible cell phone. It's going to evolve the best possible ideas. Because the good ideas are going to outcompete the bad ideas in this market, because people know good things when they see them. So there are certain sort of doubts and questions that have to creep into your mind. And again, it's like the blockchain in a sense, because you're saying, who's in charge? You're like, no one's in charge, man. We're going to leave it to the system. The system is in charge. And so here's this, when people search for a way, one of the things that really, if there's sort of one realization that I had that put me off of libertarianism or anarcho-capitalism even, it's when I decided, Maist got me, not Maist, Hoppe got me reading Maist and a lot of other sort of pre-modern thinkers. And one of the things that you realize clearly when you read them is that the principle that sovereignty, like energy, is conserved, that there's always someone in power, has never really been violated. And it's very hard to violate that. So here are these systems. Here's this system. It's very attractive to imagine this perpetual motion device where you can have something that is coherent, that is orderly, but that is not governed, that where no one is ruling. Because one of the things that does is it really appeals to this sense in people that to not be ruled is the first step toward ruling. So, Hobbes writes about, no one really wants the desolate freedom of the wild ass. What they mean when they say they want freedom is they want basically power. They may mean power over themselves or their own communities, but they're always asking for power. And so to overthrow another power, or to have no power above you, is a very, very good feeling. It really feels good to your kind of inner chimpanzee, because it shows that you're like a chimpanzee on the rise, right? So this idea of being governed by a system which does not have to be trusted, rather than people who you have to place your faith in and obey and follow, is very, very attractive. So this accounts for a lot of the attraction of the model of the marketplace of ideas, right? So the question is, when I look at this system, it's like looking at the blockchain. I'm like, okay, here's a system that purports to evolve the best possible ideas. Okay, it's a system, and obviously we depend for safety on those being good ideas. So the question is, can the system be hacked? Can it be perverted into basically being something that actually generates bad ideas? Or maybe does it even need to be hacked? Is it even secure at all? Is the first question to ask. And so when you ask this question, okay, how can the marketplace of ideas be hacked? How can it be exploited? How can it be perverted? Software security researchers, when they talk about hacking, have this concept of a weird machine, where you're basically hacking a system, hacking any like operating system. You're basically turning it from something that does the behavior that it's expected to do into a system that does something its designers never intended it to do. So, when you think about the U.S. Constitution, you can kind of, reflect a little on that, right? So the question is this an unhackable system, the marketplace of ideas? And here's a couple of ways you can hack it. So a very traditional way of hacking it is by coercion. And so you can simply say, okay, we have a marketplace of ideas, but if you publish ideas that the information minister doesn't like, the SA will come to your house and beat you up. Presto. That is simply another selective pressure on the marketplace of ideas. And it says that, ideas that will anger the information minister have, are strongly selected against. And therefore, this is not a marketplace of ideas. It is simply a marketplace of ideas. It is not a marketplace of ideas that is judged by how true and good these ideas are. It is a marketplace of ideas judged by what pleases the information minister. Now, these connections are a little easy to trace. People might not like the information minister for that. So what we're going to do next, this is actually totally routine in Europe, by the way, also in Latin America, is we're going to use positive means. And so the information minister is going to basically subsidize, often through covert means, often just openly, the institutions of media that he likes. Never forget that Orwell wrote 1984 after working at the BBC, right? Somehow no one is like, oh, state press, just like Viktor Orban, right? It's actually not like Viktor Orban. It works in a completely different way. So, Viktor Orban would basically subsidize the press, but Viktor Orban is a monarch. And the most important thing to understand about where we are is that our system, there are three forms of government, which are sort of forms of political power, or ways that political power can express itself. These are monarchy, oligarchy, and democracy. Or in other words, people power, network power, organized power. And so the question of how you juke the marketplace of ideas, how you hack the marketplace of ideas in a monarchy, is the question that we're used to thinking about. We're like, oh yeah, Hitler did this, and then he just closed the competing presses, or a more crafty despot will subsidize the papers he likes, or Orban is a perfect example, because he's basically consolidated the Hungarian media using only sort of legal, semi-legal methods, right? But he's still basically created this very classic, soft, one-party right-wing state, in Europe in the 21st century. I don't think it'll last, but there it is. But that's and of course, people would, scream bloody murder if Trump somehow started doing this. If the Trump fortune, imagine Trump gets elected and then he starts buying newspapers, you have
in Israel, the newspapers are all privately owned, and Sheldon Adelson gives his away.
Yeah, right. And suddenly, you have a subscription to the Washington Post, and you wake up and it's the Trump Post. So that's a that's the sort of the pre-modern way of solving this problem. It's ugly and it kind of doesn't have legs. But actually, that's not at all the way the world works today, and that's not at all what creates this imbalance in power. So what we've established so far is that there are basically two ways of jinxing the information marketplace. You can do it by coercion, or you can do it by reward. But we've only discussed centralized reward. Okay, now we get into the more advanced graduate level topic of decentralized reward. The way that decentralized reward works is that you have a state that leaks. So it leaks, essentially, it's leaking power. And concretely, what that means is that it's leaking information and it's leaking influence. So if it's leaking information, obviously, shit comes out the building that doesn't come out the front door. And you know how Apple feels about it when shit comes out of the building that doesn't come out the front door. You know, and the second thing that it's leaking that Apple also, by the way, doesn't leak is influence. So basically, you know, you can't imagine Apple really actually giving a fuck what, you know, John Gruber, you know, thinks this product should happen. It'll read John Gruber or whatever, but, you know, Apple is in charge of Apple. And so, the pattern of the 20th century oligarchy is to move core functions like deciding what is true or what should be done outside the state proper, and specifically moving it away from democratic control, which it describes as, of course, political. You know, democracy is good, but politics is bad. You might have heard that. It's actually a little bit Animal Farm when you think about it, right? So it's actually full-on Animal Farm, right? And that's a very, very old Animal Farm trope. That's not from the second half of the 20th century. That's from the first half. That's early first half, right? So you get this sense that you have like the state that power leaks out of, that where foundations, for example, the New Deal. You know, if we're going way, way back, the New Deal was actually composed, it was called the Swope Plan. It was composed by basically NGOs. And then it was adopted by FDR. So already you see this pattern of, oh, let's ask the universities what's true. And so you know, it's sort of only a very small step from that to you're a government agency. You don't want to get bad press. Like the number one purpose of all government agencies is to not get bad press. As soon as you adopt that mindset, you've shifted executive control of what you do to the press. So you're leaking influence. And you're leaking influence, you're leaking power to agencies that are not part of the government. When you leak information, for example, if you go and look at, you know, a copy of the New York Times, you know, 2/3 to all of the stories on that page contain information stolen from the government and sold to you, the subscriber. The New York Times cannot be competed with or replaced because only, you know, its famous name, which basically makes it a quasi-governmental institution, entitles it to steal information from the government and sell it. You don't have that right. You'll be prosecuted. And so essentially the easiest way to model the New York Times is to say, this is actually a quasi-governmental agency. You know, if I look at it nominally, no, it pretends to be a private company. But let's imagine that the New York Times was actually a branch of the Department of Information, the DOI. And it's not called the New York Times anymore. It's called People's Newspaper Number One. Then you realize that, okay, what is People's Newspaper Number One? It states the official information of the, official opinion of power. Everyone in the government has to listen to it and essentially obey it. It decides what is true. This is not just a government agency. This is the most powerful government agency. When you basically say, I, as someone interested in politics, am interested in sort of issues rather than just who I follow, already at that point you're saying, oh, we're going to have a government that's governed by this automatic marketplace of ideas. You know, we can't serve, we're free men. We're all kings at heart. We can't serve anyone, but we can serve this abstract mechanism. And so, in a sense, the problem with modern society is that people are unwilling to serve a master, and they're willing to serve a mechanism. And these mechanisms have just gone completely fucking insane. And like the marketplace of ideas is just like this, sewage lagoon that's full of just nothing but blue-green algae, right? And there's no everything you can't even get a drink of water out of it. It's all blue-green algae. It all has the same disgusting, taste. And people are like, how do I get out of this? And the only thing they can think to do is to basically stock this disgusting sewage pond with beautiful rainbow trout. The trout just die, and now the pond stinks of dead fish as well. And it's like, no, this is not. You're barking down the wrong tree entirely here. And the reason that you're barking down this wrong tree is there's essentially a kind of Luciferian property in your mind that says, I am a king. Everyone has told you since you were 4 years old that you were a king. You're a free man. You don't have to serve anyone. And so you wind up serving these, not a person, but these deranged mechanisms. And people feel that makes them, this sort of very juvenile inability to serve and inability to follow makes them sort of freer and better, and makes them aristocrats. And if you look at the real culture of real aristocrats, there's a phrase that I've always admired. Some people might think of this as a Nazi phrase. It's actually a Prussian army saying. I'm sure the Nazis liked it as well, which is simply that those who wish to command must first learn to obey. And if there's anything that our era is just absolutely terrible at, it's following and obeying. And the result of our inability to follow and obey human beings is that we basically follow and obey these completely deranged mechanisms. Like, oh, let's calculate how much, like Luxus Populi Suprema Lex. And I'm just like, this is a terrible, this is a terrible formula. And if you're looking for a better formula to serve, there isn't one.
Well, one thing,
and that's a serious black